In triathlon, people often talk about training to heart rate and different heart rate zones, but what do they actually mean and how do you find out what your zones are? Today I'm going to get tested to find out exactly what my 5 zones are and how I can best utilise them in my training. For more videos like this and behind the scenes action with our pro athletes and live race content, make sure to like, subscribe and share our videos. When it comes to triathlon training, a lot of training plans focus on heart rate zones. But what does that actually mean and how do you find out exactly what your zones are? Today I'm here at the Human Performance Lab in London with Richard to find out what mine are and how I can use them for my training.
Yeah, so good question. Generally speaking, heart rate training zones are determinant of the exercise intensity of an exercise bout. So as exercise intensity increases, you'll tend to find that your heart rate will increase to its maximum. Now, there are various different ways that we can determine your heart rate max. One of them being a general equation, which is 220 minus age. Now, for the general population, that's absolutely fine, but for the individual, doing a test such as a VO2 max test that is designed to take you to your max, we will then find your heart rate maximum, and then from there we'll be able to split your training into specific zones that we can work on various different performance parameters and ultimately use that training to prescribe more individualized and precise training for you.
So I know there's the easy zones, zone 1 and zone 2. I've been told I should be able to hold a conversation while I'm on a run in those zones. But how many zones are there and how hard is that top zone?
So generally speaking, most people's training will be categorized into 5 different zones, so zone 1 to 5. You tend to find zone 1 as the easier recovery zone and taking up through to zone 5, which is designed to take you to your max, so around 90 to 95% and above of your maximum heart rate. Where people hit those zones will be individualized, okay? So hence doing a test to find out where those zones are. You can also split them down into 3 different zones to make things a little bit easier, but then they tend to become slightly more generic compared to the typical zone 1 to 5 model.
And how long should I be able to hold zone 5 for?
Not a huge amount of time, and you'll experience that when we do a test later. But generally speaking, yeah, that zone 5 is that pretty disgusting, horrible zone that people can typically hold for a matter of minutes.
Sounds like a painful afternoon ahead. So once I've got my zones, what are the benefits of training to heart rate rather than power, for example?
Yeah, so it can be a pretty significant marker of fatigue as well. So if you've gone through an extended period of training and you identify that all of a sudden for the same power output or the speed, that your heart rate is actually quite a lot more elevated than before, it can be a sign of fatigue that you just know that you need to pull back so that your physiological response is actually a lot greater than what it would previously be for the same kind of power output. It can also just allow you to keep things in check in terms of your speed, your power outputs and so on and so on. So I really like heart rate as a metric to prescribe your training. But as I said, you can use power or speed generally. Yeah.
Okay, that's all great information. Let's go get this test done.
Look forward to it.
Okay, I'm ready. What exactly is going to happen next?
Cool. So, piece of equipment that we're going to use is obviously the treadmill. Okay, we've got a heart rate monitor. That's going to sit just underneath the breastbone. That's going to give us a real live data on how your heart rate is responding to the level of exercise. Fancy gas mask, okay, what this is doing is measuring the volume of oxygen that's coming in versus the volume of carbon dioxide coming out. So that is going to give us all the information from that regard. In terms of the testing protocol, really simple test. It's an incremental step test. What that means is that it's going to start at a very low intensity, 6 kilometers an hour, which should be walking pace for you. And then every minute we're going to increase the speed of the treadmill by 1 kilometer per hour until you reach your point of maximum exhaustion.
I have a feeling this is going to be like a microwave minute, the longest minute of my life.
People have said that, yeah. Yeah. So the first 2 minutes we're just getting some resting data off us so we can see we've got some baseline values to to go off, and then once the test is over, we then have 1 minute where Emily is just resting as she is, just to try and catch her breath, and we can then pick out some recovery data for her as well, so how fast her heart rate drops within that minute's recovery. In 3, 2, 1, and off we go. So nice slow walking pace. Okay, up to speed 7. So that's the first stage done. Slight increase in speed. All right, coming up to 10 kilometers an hour. Awesome, Emily, come on, keep it going, keep it going. Loads in the tank here, come on. So we're getting to a pretty high intensity now, so Emily's going to be working pretty hard. So I still think she's got a little bit left in her, but it's now getting pretty tough. Go on then, Emily, let's push now. Push it hard, push hard, push hard. Come on, keep going, keep going. Brilliant, well done. Okay, just hold it there. Okay, so we just get 1 minute of you now, just catching your breath. Okay, just nice and relaxed, try not to talk. Just get 1 minute, just catching your breath.
So I have finished my test, and I can now see you've got a nice graph of all the different heart rate zones.
Yep.
What are they, what do they mean, and how can I make them improve?
Yep, so we tend to use a 5-zone model. So zone 1 is typically that recovery, very, very low intensity. So it might be an intensity zone that you do on a recovery day. Very, very light, typically around 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate. Then as the exercise intensity increases, we transition through the zones, so into zone 2, into zone 3, 4 and 5. Zone 2 is the point at which I'd imagine you'll spend a lot of your training time. Okay, so we can see with you that you will leave zone 2 at a heart rate of 149 beats per minute, and we have a range for you, so between 119 beats per minute and 149 beats per minute, that's your zone 2. So I would recommend that you spend a lot of your time in that zone 2. Then we move into zones 3, 4, which then increases as the exercise intensity will increase. Okay, and then we get to that very, very top end zone, which is the feeling that you would experience towards the end.
Yeah.
And typically that's symbolic of around 90 to 95+% of your maximum heart rate.
And how long would you expect to be able to last in that zone?
In that top zone, not a huge amount of time. You would typically find that once you've hit that zone, you might have maybe a minute, 2 minutes of exercise left in you if you continue to work at that intensity. So it's the point where you've reached the top of the cliff, and if you carry on going any further, you're going to fall off that cliff. Okay?
I definitely felt that on the test.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so now we've established what my zones are, which or how do I need to improve, or how do I use that knowledge to implement into my training to make me faster on race day?
Yep, so using this knowledge, you can apply it to your training by saying, right, well, if you know that you have a 90-minute run or ride, and your coach has given you specific zones to use, you can adopt those heart rate training zones to either your speed or your power zones. So if your coach has prescribed a 90-minute run and it's supposed to be an easy pace, we can see with you that once your heart rate gets above 149, if the intensity continues to rise at that fashion, then ultimately you're not going to be able to last too long if the intensity increases. So it can just be used as a guide, along with other subjective feelings of fatigue. So if you can hold a conversation throughout the session, chances are you're going to be below that zone 2 or in that zone 2 and below. If you start to having to break conversation, you know that exercise intensity is probably increasing beyond that zone 2 realm. So for you, I would really recommend that you spend the bulk of your time, as with all triathletes, to spend the bulk of their time within that zone 2. So doing a test is probably the best way to do it. Yes, you can use it off your watch or other devices, but the best way to do it would be to do a test.
And so what you're saying is I essentially am training my body to get faster at that heart rate.
Yes, so if you can improve or increase the speed at that prescribed heart rate, then ultimately you're going to be able to perform faster and it's not going to cost you any more. So if you were previously running at 10 kilometers an hour at a heart rate of 120 beats per minute, if with training you can then progress that to work at 12 kilometers an hour at a heart rate of 120, you're achieving a higher output, but it's not costing you any more.
And is that achieved from training at that heart rate, or do we start to bring in some of the top end max heart rate to help improve?
Yeah, so a combination of both. Okay, so it's not an approach where you just do one session or one type of training. We do want to do a combination of both, but where you're going to spend the bulk of your time as a triathlete is going to be in that aerobic domain. So it makes sense to spend a lot of your training at that intensity.
In the zone 2
That
area.
zone 2, yeah.
So I have my heart rate zones, which is, as you mentioned, really valuable for training.
Yep.
But I've often heard people talk about racing to a heart rate because of external factors like the course, the hills, the weather.
Yep.
Why is this?
Yeah, so other factors can influence your heart rate. You know, kind of certainly I think that's an overlooked component is the adrenaline of a race, which you can see when you first started, your heart rate was a lot higher above resting levels because you were probably a little bit nervous and things like that. So it can often just be used as a guide rather than a sole predictor on what is going to happen. So yes, if it is a particularly hilly event, then chances when you are going to be running up those hills, your heart rate is going to increase. Same thing if it's windy. If you're going to have to work harder, your heart rate is going to be symbolic of that. So if we can use it as a guide, then it can just allow us to prescribe our training and also just inform race strategy and race pacing a little bit more, rather than if we're just going purely off feel.
Okay. And I did that test on the treadmill, so I got it for running. Is it the exact same heart rate zones for biking, or do I have to do a different test?
No, so we can do the test on the bike as well. Generally speaking, because you're going to be standing up and the body's having to work harder when you run, then when we do it on the bike, we could see probably a 10 beat drop off on those zones. So yes, we can adopt it from taking your heart rate data from the run and adopt it to your bike data. But ultimately what we'd like to do if I'm working with a triathlete is do a test on both, because your physiology as a runner could be different to your physiology as a cyclist. So it could be working on one thing on the bike, but another thing on the run.
And how long would you say we need to make, you've given me the information today, I'm going to go home and train to my heart rate zones. How long do you think you should expect before you see an improvement if I follow the guidance that you've said today?
So just like with anything, you need a bit of an incubation period to allow the adaptations to occur. So if you're getting in quality training with adequate recovery and repair to allow your body to react to the stimulus that you've provided it, I think you could potentially start seeing some changes in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Hopefully you've now got a better understanding of heart rate zones, how you find them out, and how you can utilise them for your training. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let us know how you get on in the comments. Let us know if you train to heart rate, and we'll see you on the next one.